Let me tell you, every small town has its own center of gravity, right? In Millage, wasn't some fancy statue or city hall clock tower. No, it was Hal Mercer's corner booth at the old Diner Maple and Pine, where the bell over the door rang, just soft enough to let you know someone important had arrived. That's how it always started, the air thick with maple syrup and that unmistakable scent of fried eggs. Hal would stroll in just before sunrise, same careful pace, jacket patched and faded, face that looked like he'd smiled more in his younger days than he ever talked about now, and without even glancing, he'd make for that booth by the window, like it was reserved by some unwritten law. Darlene would see him coming, pour his black coffee before he could even nod, and say, "Morning, sugar," and he'd just give her that half-smile, drop his old notebook beside the salt shaker, and fold himself into the seat, coat still hiding that mystery patch on his arm. You know, Hal was part of the place, almost as much as the napkin holders and that jukebox that always circled back to Sinatra at 7 a.m. Sharp. He'd order the same pancakes, 2 strips of bacon, leave his tip before the food, even came $3, always tucked under his saucer. And nobody asked why he was there every morning or where he came from, just that he'd always be there, part of the rhythm, like the steady hum of the place itself. But that Monday, things got a little more interesting when Brandon Hale barged in. That guy, city planner, all nerves and folders, made enough noise for 3 people, always in a rush and never without something to complain about. "Big week ahead, people," he'd yell, papers flying, and Darlene would just roll her eyes, ask if he wanted caffeine or courtesy first. But Brandon couldn't leave well enough alone. He spotted Hal in his booth and couldn't resist, said, "Still got the throne, huh?" with a smirk that bounced off the windows. Darlene, bless her heart, set Hal's breakfast down and just laid it out for everyone to told the whole diner how Hal once pulled her son out of traffic, broke his wrist, never said a word about it, just paid his bill and walked away. Brandon, caught off guard, stumbled through an apology. Not that Hal looked up from his paper, he just kept reading, jacket hiding that faded blue triangle patch, and let the silence weigh the air until Brandon finally got the hint and took his drama outside. Thing is, Hal wasn't just a fixture at the diner. Every Monday, he'd show up at Mosswood Park before the sun even had a chance to warm the ground. There he'd be, cleaning the benches, wiping dew from bronze plaques, planting little flags and marigolds in front of stones so old you had to squint to read the names. He never said why, just went about it with a slow, steady patience that told you this mattered to him in ways most folks wouldn't understand. If you ever passed by, you'd see him kneeling by the plaque for Lieutenant Thomas Callahan, straightening flowers, hands careful even as the arthritis in his knuckles made him wince now and then. One morning, Brandon showed up, clipboard out, talking about authorized zones and liability, all city protocol, and tried to tell Hal he couldn't be there. Hal just nodded, stuck a little wooden sign in the dirt. Remember them, handwritten, crooked but honest. And out of nowhere, Tina Alvarez from Parks and Rec tough as nails, jacket way, too big, stepped out and backed Hal up. "He's been here longer than your permit," she said, and you could see Brandon shrinking, realizing he didn't have a clue what was really going on in this town. Later that week, Veterans Day rolled around, and the whole town gathered in Mosswood Park, kids in 2 big band uniforms, the honor guard lined up, all waiting for the big speech. Brandon, up at the mic, sweating through his sport coat, stumbling over names, trying to keep the ceremony moving. Then he introduced the guest of honor, General Ella Torrance. She marched up with her silver braid and enough medals to make your eyes water. But right before she spoke, she saw Hal sitting quiet on the far bench, hands on his cane, patch peeking out under his sleeve. She stepped right off that stage, walked across the grass, and snapped a salute so crisp the crowd stopped breathing. Gasps all around. Someone whispered, "That's Mr. Hal from the diner," and a little kid pointed, saying, "He saved my cat." General Torrance held her salute, then told the crowd, "That patch was only given to 5 men. He's the last one standing. You could have heard a pin drop." Hal nodded once, rose, returned the salute, and just as the first note of taps rang out, the whole town finally saw the man they'd been sitting next to all these years. After the parade, the diner felt different. For the first time in forever, Hal's booth was empty, jacket folded neat on the table, patch turned outward, a receipt with Hal Mercer scrawled on the bottom. Brandon came in late, didn't even do his usual routine, just went straight to the booth and sat like it was a pew in church, tracing the napkin with Hal's note, "Some honors don't come with ceremony." Darlene joined him, poured coffee, told stories how Hal never let her call an ambulance, how he just said, "It's just a sprain." Tina came in too, added her own how after a blizzard. Every path and headstone was cleared, the lanterns relit, and all she found was a receipt signed H. Mercer, night crew. They pieced together a portrait of the man who never needed applause, who just did what was right day after day. Brandon decided to find out more. He hit the library, ran into Maggie the librarian. She seemed to know he was coming, led him to a drawer of old microfilm and stories from decades ago. Together, they found a headline, 5 rescued from Nightfall Drop. Hero remains unnamed. A paragraph about an airman carrying wounded soldiers through the jungle under blackout conditions, wearing a triangle patch not in any official record. That was Hal. Always was. Brandon followed every clue. Hal's P.O. box, a sagging rental, empty mailbox. Mr. Thomas next door, cane and sharp eyes, told him where to look next. Sunday, 3 p.m., Hillrest Cemetery. That's where Hal would be. He's not hiding, son. He just doesn't need to be found. So that Sunday, Brandon went. He found Hal by Lieutenant Callahan's stone, just standing, holding a single white flower, silent. Brandon stood beside him, no words needed. Eventually, both placed their flowers, and Hal finally spoke about carrying a friend 3 miles through the jungle, about doing it because he could. Brandon admitted, "I should have listened sooner." Hal didn't nod or walk away. They just stood, 2 men in a sea of gold leaves, each learning something new about what it means to show up. Later, at the high school's career day, Hal finally took the mic. "Not all service is in uniform," he said. "Sometimes it's just doing the job when no one's looking." When a kid asked about the patch, Hal answered plain and simple. "It meant I went where others wouldn't." And that room, full of teenagers for once, just listened. No applause, no fuss, just understanding. Days after, Brandon went back to the library. Maggie met him with a key. Inside the display case, under a warm light, was Hal's jacket, patch turned outward, brass plaque underneath reading, "He reminded us." Norman Jr. tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can I wear a jacket like his someday?" Brandon just smiled, because he knew Hal never needed a crowd. That was his real legacy. So, if this story gets under your skin, maybe it's because you've known someone like Hal, quiet, steady, never needing a spotlight, but the kind who leaves a mark on a whole town just by being there. Maybe we all have a chance to be that person, to remind folks that some honors don't come with a ceremony, and sometimes the best way to serve is to show up day in and day out, without ever needing to be found. So what do you think? Who in your life reminds you of Hal? Is dignity really about medals and parades, or about the quiet things no one ever sees? I want to hear your take. Drop your thoughts below. Tell me about the unsung heroes you know, and let's talk about what real honor means in a world that moves a little too fast to notice.